21. When they had been well and far away from Conshudo, they stopped to recollect themselves. Wind's clothes were in a sorry state, so Grunt gave her his own jacket, which she accepted with a kiss.
"Oh, love, you really came for me. I dared not even hope,"
she said softly, with painful emotion pulling her voice tight. He embraced her with shaking arms.
"I didn't know this old heart could still feel after all these years, but when I got the report you'd been captured, I couldn't do anything. Not until I knew you were safe. The others tried to go on without me, but if those kids hadn't come along, I'd probably still be on that cold bed, waiting to die."
Watching the two of them, Chesney couldn't help but feel some strange pull in his own heart. That feeling of loss, of need, and despair gripped him once again, and he couldn't help but turn to the west and look at the great cliffs and wonder and worry at Midia. Why now? Why did he miss her so much that it felt like he'd never be whole again? He couldn't think about it, not now. It was too much right now, after everything that had happened today. As long as she was safe and near, then he could ponder his own feelings in due time. Not now, when all he wanted to do was leave them behind and run back and find her. But couldn't. He closed his eyes and focused his spirit. The new yet familiar feeling of seeing the gaps between everything filled his mind. And yet, he could not focus. When he had used the magic before, it was like he knew exactly where Masuda was in relation to him. But now, it was like spinning a globe and trying to stop it, blindfolded, hoping to hit the right place. He cursed loudly and kicked the sand so hard that his ankle hurt.
"I can't get the damn magic to work." "What magic?"
Wind asked.
"I have a spell that should be able to send us back to the cave in an instant, but I can't make it work,"
he growled, holding his head by the temples. After an awkward moment, Wind extricated herself from Grunt's arms and asked the question she'd been dying to ask since she was rescued.
"Well, since we seem to have a bit of a walk, I think it's about time you explained what's going on with this young man and his friend."
Grunt Winston motioned for everyone to start walking.
"Well, that's a bit of a long story,"
Grunt explained, eventually, what had transpired since her capture.
"And that's when the rest of the force decided to go through with the plan anyway, and we landed Chesney here, and his friend, Midia. They were pulled from the destroyed rope network car."
Wind gasped.
"You went through with it, even after I was captured."
He shrugged.
"No, more like those stir-crazy idiots did while I wasn't paying attention. Anyway, these two kids show up and explain that they're on a mission to destroy Noai Grin. I have no idea what went through my head, but I saw these two as my ticket to free you, and just kinda went with it."
After he didn't elaborate, Wind asked,
"So, you held his friend hostage, and took him to help rescue me? Is that what I'm hearing?"
Gunny spoke up then, after hours of silence.
"Not his smartest move, no." "Shut up, lunkhead,"
Grunt shouted, then sheepishly turned to Wind.
"But yeah, sorry if I let you down. Don't apologize to me, apologize to him,"
Wind said, crossing her arms and looking over to Chesney, who was walking steadily beside them.
"Yeah, Chesney. I'm sorry for everything."
Chesney didn't bat an eye.
"Sorry, for kidnapping two 13-year-old kids and forcing them to do your dirty work?"
The silence afterwards was awkward. He should be angry, but honestly, all of those kinds of strong emotions were too used up after the battle. He was just tired, and listening to them talk had helped to hide himself from the thoughts he didn't want to be having. He sighed.
"It's fine. Anyway, I honestly can't even blame you for being suspicious. Someone I knew once, in Nazquat. He'd been tricked by Zagos's agents, I think. I don't have any proof, but I don't think anything is past that maniac."
After a time, he said one last thing.
"If you had asked, though, I'm sure we would have both agreed to help you rescue her."
After that, he stayed silent. They walked until sunset threatened night and set up camp. By that time, they had been deep in the midst of the forest north of Conshudo. It was strange to be in a wood with dark green leaves, so used to the blue leaves of Nasquat as he was. But it was like he had to force himself to pay attention to his surroundings. Whether it was his own exhaustion, or his churning mind, he didn't know. While setting up camp, once his tent was ready, they told him to head to bed after a light meal and not worry about a watch. He had earned a rest, and gladly took it. But sleep would not come. When his eyes closed, all he could see were bodies. Faces that he had once spied laughing in a crowd, next lying dead in the streets. That enormous rage he had felt in that moment, when nothing seemed wrong and everything was justice, was gone now. Had he gone too far, or had he done what was right? Was it necessary? Had there been a better way? He couldn't forget the face of that one boy, who had been around Gig's age. That salute. And then, the boy's rage-filled face as he tried to cut Chesney with a knife in the middle of the huge battle. He couldn't stop wondering if the child had survived. He'd inadvertently given the child a vicious cut to the face, and then right after, the great lightning. How many people had he killed on this journey? All the children, teachers at school, the woman in the underground temple under Jarain, and the soldiers from Sasquatch masquerading as Naisquat revolutionaries. All the soldiers at the consecrated ground where the helmet was stored, and now, almost a whole town. He shuddered, knowing there would be yet still more until Zagos was defeated, because he knew that there'd be no peace for Lennis until that madman who had built his own Noe grin was stopped. But more and more as his mind spun, his dark visions were replaced by small glimpses of Midia's face. He wondered what she would say to him when he told her what he had done. Would she agree with his decision? Understand his pain and comfort him? Or would she have seen a bloodless way to have done the job? Be appalled, and hate him for it? The thought that she would hate him was agonizing. At last, it was all too much, and he whipped his blanket off himself and exited his tent. The night air was refreshingly cool, and the gentle crackling remains of the fire they'd made still lingered.
Can't sleep?
Wind asked Riley, wrapped in a blanket near the fire. She was alone.
No. Though, I'm surprised they had you do the watch too.
She shook her head.
Couldn't sleep either, so I sent Grunt off to bed. Come on, sit down. Let's talk.
Lacking anything else to do, he obliged and sat next to her, and stared into the fire.
Wind, can I ask you something?
She smiled, and said,
It would be real quiet otherwise.
It was nice to see her face like this, not bruised, swollen, and bloody, calm, and happy. Maybe he should lead up to a question like this, but he was too antsy to beat around the bush. He figured if anyone could give him an honest judgment of his actions, it would be the person who was about to be the victim of that accursed down.
Why didn't Conshudo? Did I go too far?
She blew out air in something not quite a sigh.
Damn, kid. You just had to go for the bullseye there, huh?
She took a time looking into the fire as well, then asked,
Tell me about your journey so far. How did you get here? Ignoring my question? No, I'm trying to get the context so I can answer you properly.
He told her everything. It felt like a confession. The school, his role, the places he'd been, the people he'd saved, and the people he'd killed, and why. His nightmares even his heritage, though he asked her to keep that bit a secret. He had so many secrets, it was hard to remember who knew what sometimes, but at least this time, with this person, he wanted to be honest. He had to know if he had done the right thing. When he was done, and she'd asked her final question, she looked something between tired and horrified.
Damn. I don't know what to say. I've been fighting for years, but to have your whole life destroyed and then have to risk your life on your own for months. As a kid, I can't even imagine.
He shrugged.
It happens.
She sighed.
It does. I've seen it myself countless times here, and now I'm seeing it again. Chesney, what's happened to you? It's beyond anything any child should ever have to deal with.
Reading between the lines, he said,
"So, you think that makes what I did okay?" "Honestly, I do think what you did was okay. But not just because of what you've been through.
She wrapped herself tighter in her blanket.
The things they did to me. It was like I wasn't even a person to them. Like I was an animal. After the torture, I was put on display and made to endure everyone's scorn for days. At the end of it, I would have been killed in front of a crowd of cheering faces, knowing I'd betrayed my friends and possibly doomed them to the same fate."
Her face darkened, and she narrowed her eyes.
Sasquatch doesn't need people like that.
Then, she turned to him.
"Chedsney, watching you fight, I was ashamed to admit it to myself before, but it was like watching justice in motion. I was so filled with joy I almost cried. Until then, I was almost longing for death. I saw you there, fighting for me, and I felt safe for the first time in. I don't know when, but watching you made me feel like it was all going to be okay. That feeling is priceless to me. I'll never forget it."
She tossed another log on the fire.
"So, no, you didn't go too far. The troubles that town landed in, those terrible wounds you delivered, if you ask me, they were all self-inflicted, and well-deserved. Even that kid?"
he asked. Pain in his voice he struggled to hold back. She didn't look away.
"War is filled with tragedies. Nobody wins in a war. And we are in a war. Maybe he lived, and maybe he will look back on this one day and realize how messed up his life was. Maybe he won't. Maybe he's dead. That's just life. You, me, him. We're all victims of this terrible conflict, Chedsney. So you want to lay the blame anywhere. Lay it on, say ghosts."
It took him a moment to find his voice.
"Thanks."
He meant it too. He knew maybe she would be biased in her assessment, but even that felt like a huge weight off his shoulders. And, when he searched his feelings, it felt like exactly what Medea would have said to him. She would have been absolutely heartbroken to see Wind in that cell. The realization was both a warm comfort and a cold regret. He felt so achingly lonely without her beside him. He felt her absence like an empty spot in the world that he could always feel behind him. When had this started? When had she become such a part of himself that losing her was like tearing away a piece from his own soul? He thought back to when he had first laid eyes on her, her beautiful purple hair, framing her slender face, and wrapped in the light of the sunset coming through the holes in the cave wall. There had been that instant connection, but that wasn't this feeling. She was smart, and beautiful, and fun, and sincere. He'd found that out over their journey together. Of course, they'd argued and fought, but who wouldn't? They'd quickly learned that they could depend on each other, no matter what, though, and they'd each risk their lives for each other on almost a daily basis. So, of course he cared for her. Of course, he cared for her. But then, what was this? This? Was it when he went with her to Hagudo, and felt like he doomed her there? Or when he went berserk trying to save their lives in the well? That look of desperate hope she'd given him as she saved his life atop the Temple of Jarain? When had it been? Slowly, like the turning of a long-rusted water wheel, the thought dawned on him. Of that moment he watched her come alive and live her dream on the stage at the minstrel's tent. Watching her direct, and move, and sing, and act was like being put in a trance. The whole tent had felt alive, and like the whole world turned slowly around that one moment. She was like magic, like nothing he had ever seen before in his life. He felt almost transported to the past, reenacting in his mind what turmoil Sophia must have gone through when she struggled with her feelings. But then, there was that moment. The song had reached its climax, and their eyes met, and it was like nobody else was there, and she was singing only for him. It had only lasted a moment, but somehow had lasted for so long that every moment of it was seared into his memory. He could easily remember the way the light was reflecting off her hair, how it bounced, her pose, her eyes, how she smiled, and how her lips parted just so between notes. His heart beat achingly once more. Had that been it? That one moment was he.
Wind, can I ask you another question? Welp, I was waiting for you to ever since you started making faces over there.
He hid his face in embarrassment for a moment, then braved on through.
If you make fun of me, I will never forgive you. But, how do you know if you are in love?
She balked for a moment and stared wide-eyed at him.
Wow, okay. That was not a question I was expecting to field today. I take it you're asking me because you're feeling like you are, but you're not sure, right?
He nodded, feeling his face turn bright red from even having to ask the stupid question. She smiled gently and asked,
Well, try to describe it, and I'll tell you, okay?
He was afraid it was going to be that kind of answer.
I don't really know how to describe it. My insides are all jumbled up. Sometimes I think of her and my mind soars with joy, and other times it's like my heart wants to pull me down into the ground and be buried forever. When she's there, it feels normal, but when she's gone, it's like I've forgotten what normal even is. When I see her get hurt, it's like nothing else matters. You ever argue? Oh, well, yeah, sometimes. How would you feel like if she started dating a really nice person, but not you? It wouldn't feel good, but I'd be happy for her, if she was happy. Would you fight for her? Of course. Would you die for her? Yes. Really? Unquestionably.
Wind blew out a short breath.
Oh goodness, my little darling hero. I'm going to have to give Grunt a little talking to about separating two young children in love like he did. Well, I don't actually know if she likes me like that. I didn't even know I felt like that until she was suddenly gone, and then it felt like have no idea how to be without her. Would you tell her how you feel as soon as you see her next? Anything but that.
She laughed.
You'd fight and die for her, but confessing your feelings is too far. Yeah, that's love all right.
Wind unwrapped her blanket and strung it around the two of them.
Well, why don't you tell me all about her, and we'll see if we can't figure out what to do next, okay?
The next day dawned, finding everyone more or less rested. Chesney, caught between needing to see Midia again, and also dreading having to deal with his feelings, made no argument about setting up a proper breakfast before heading out. Off to one side, Wind and Grunt were having a hushed conversation as they ate, and it looked like Grunt was losing.
So, how are you feeling, little guy?
Gunny asked, surprising Chesney by gently sitting down beside him, with plates of food for them both.
Tired,
he said, and thanked Gunny for the food. It was a mixture of salted meat and scrambled eggs with some aromatic vegetables as well. They tasted wonderfully warm and savory in the cold morning air.
Wow, this is really good. Gunny, I had no idea you could cook.
The huge man shrugged.
People only really look to me because of how big I am, and don't seem to think that there might be more there.
Chesney lowered his head.
Yeah, sorry about that. I guess I haven't really taken the time to get to know you on this trip. Part of it was because of being forced into it, but still, I'm sorry. It's fine. I'm used to it. My dad was a great chef. He tried to get me into cooking too, but I hated it. Now, though, that he's gone, it helps me feel connected to him. I still have a lot to learn, though.
He looked over to Wind and Gunny.
Oh boy, she's really letting him have it today. Yeah, and that's my fault. Wind and I had a talk last night, and she looked like she wanted to give Grunt an earful. Does this kind of thing happen often?
Gunny nodded.
Oh yeah, Grunt can be a real hard-headed dumbass, but Wind has a temper all her own. A real matched set. Despite the age difference, the resistance gets all kinds.
A part of him wondered something. Now that the topic had come up,
Do people who love each other usually argue this much? I can't say I've known a lot of people in relationships, if I'm being honest. My mother's always been a widow as long as I've known.
And now, I really need to ask her some questions about that when I finally get home. Grant tilted his head.
Well, I'm not exactly an expert, but I've seen a lot of love and die in the resistance. Something about putting your life on the line every day really throws your life into perspective, and people form bonds quickly, and lose them just as quickly too. But one thing I've noticed, the ones that stay together, they communicate. Even when it hurts, or sucks. They argue, but it's because they care. No one gets mad at something they don't care about.
Gunny cracked his knuckles.
We're getting a little sidetracked. I actually came over here because I wanted to talk about yesterday. Are you really okay?
Realization dawned.
Oh, that.
Gunny remained silent, waiting for an answer.
Yeah, messed up as it is to say, this isn't my first time around a lot of death. Just the first time I've had to hurt regular people. I just keep wondering if I should have waited. What do you think?
Gunny shrugged.
I'm done sparing sympathy to my enemies. Whatever gets the job done best. What you did back there. Downright merciful in comparison to how Zagos's forces have been pursuing the resistance. I can't even imagine. And you don't want to. But I just wanted to say, if you're feeling hurt, it's okay to feel hurt. And what if I feel nothing? Well, that's okay too. And maybe you'll always feel that way. But maybe a day comes in the future, and you wake up remembering yesterday, and it hurts. If that day ever comes, it's okay to feel it. It's okay to talk about it.
The worry inside him about yesterday was all tangled up in knots. But, finally, he had given form to the biggest worry he had, that he didn't feel nearly as awful as he suspected he should.
You really think I might be able to feel hurt about things like this again? Kid, I've seen people spend the rest of their lives running from that pain. My only advice is, don't do what they did, and ignore it when it comes.
They spent a full minute in silence.
War really sucks, huh?
Chesney said, as he ate the last spoonful.
Yeah.
Not long after, they broke camp, and started their northwestern trek to return to the resistance base. The resistance trio spent time talking, but Chesney intentionally set himself apart, thinking to himself, what would it feel like, to see her again? Should he say what he and Wayne talked about as soon as they met? Or when they were on their way and could talk more privately? What if she didn't think of him that way? And what if she did? Would it be easier, or harder to fight together? And how was he going to explain himself and the attack on Conshudo? Did he even need to? More and more, though, all he could think of was wanting to see her, and make sure she was safe. It had only been a day, but who knows what could have happened? A whole mess of possible scenarios bubbled infinitely in his mind, until he found his walking pace was practically a jog.
Whoa, hold on there, kid. You're about to kill an old man back here.
Grunt practically wheezed. Wind, who was perfectly fine, if a bit flushed, said,
This is what you get for smoking.
He whined.
I already told you I gave that up months ago. Well, all the more reason you need some exercise to make up for lost time.
To Chesney, she turned and winked.
It's okay. We can hurry.
Medea, almost as soon as she had awoken, hastened to the cave mouth once more, and kept vigil over the landscape only just now lit by dawn. An hour or so later, Fiery approached, bleary-eyed. With a slumber-cracked voice, she said,
At it again, I see.
She tossed over a hard yellow fruit with a thin skin.
Here, at last have some breakfast.
Mechanically, Medea ate, hardly tasting the sweet, juicy flesh.
I'm sorry, you know,
Fiery said, after a while. It took a moment to realize she was being spoken to, and another to process what was said.
Sorry? About what?
Fiery gestured vaguely all around.
For all this. For getting you two kids mixed up with all this. Once Grunt kinda lost it there, I was in charge, and decided to go through with the plan to blow up the rope network. I should've known better after Wind was captured. And, instead of supplies, we got you two. And then you got mixed up in all our problems. So, I'm sorry.
Medea shrugged.
It's okay, Fiery. I have a feeling that we weren't going to be able to stay out of it for long anyway. What with our plan to destroy No Grin? Do you really think you can do it?
Medea clutched her chest.
Me? I don't know. But him. I know he can do it. And I'm going to help him in every way I possibly can to make sure he gets the chance.
Time was spanned by silence, and the calling of birds.
So, how long have you loved him?
Fiery asked. She breathed in to protest, but ended up coughing up instead.
What makes you say that?
Her ears burned hot.
It may surprise you, young lady, that I just may have had my fair share of crushes too.
A half-dozen lies spun in her mouth, but in the end she said,
am I really so transparent? Oh, I don't know about that. Maybe the crumbling to pieces as soon as he was gone, it might have tipped your hand just a little.
Medea groaned and covered her face.
And I take it you two haven't talked about it.
Medea looked to her feet and twisted the hems of her dress in her hands.
How can I? What if it changes things? We're the only ones who can do this. If I say something and mess everything up, that's so selfish of me. Maybe when everything's all over.
Fiery shook her head.
Good gracious, that's about as dumb as a rock that doesn't even know how to roll downhill. Hey! Well, I mean it. You're just hurting yourself, and for what? It's for everyone's sake. Who cares about everyone else? Don't you matter? Of course I. It's just not, I'm just being. What? Responsible? Or maybe you're just scared.
Medea yelled back, red-faced.
Fine. I'm scared. Okay. Are you happy?
Fiery smiled soothingly.
Yes, now that you're being honest with yourself. Please, don't tease me. Not about this.
She whined, looking back out over the landscape.
I'm not teasing you. I just don't think it helps anyone to hurt yourself over stuff like this. Come on, you two talk about it. What's the worst thing that could happen? He gets weirded out by me, and it makes things awkward and hard to fight together. And, do you really think he's that immature? That in the unlikely event he doesn't feel the same way? That it just ruins everything? I don't know. Probably not. But, what if he does, like me, and we get awkward?
Fiery shrugged her shoulders.
I mean, maybe a bit at first, but all it takes is communication. Now, think about this. What if you say nothing? You think that's not a choice that can blow up in your face? What do you mean? What if he finds someone else? Would you be okay with that?
The thought immediately made her nauseous. She instantly recalled the awful, jealous feelings whenever he would be too close with Wild, as unfair as that was to the older girl. That awful feeling when he imagined his head resting against another girl's shoulder.
I don't know. The thought makes me feel awful, though. Well, just food for thought, sweetheart. I won't press you any more on this.
Fiery twisted her back, and she heard several pops.
Will you be okay for a bit? I have some things to take care of.
Absently, Medea nodded.
Sure. I'll shout if I see them.
She had a lot of thinking to do. The trek through the forest was blur. Conversations happened, fights happened, decisions were made, but they were there and then gone like waves on a beach. At one point, a large chunk of wolfworm had been stuck to his shoulder, and he hadn't noticed until it fell off. Over and over, he stepped over what he and Wind had discussed, what he should say, and how, rehearsing every way it could go. The others had long ago given up trying to hold conversations with him, as it was impossible to hold his attention for long, and he was like the walking dead. That was until they finally left the northern forest and began to crest the final hill that hid the rolling plains between Conchudo and the Resistance base. Now, off in the distance, was the mountain range that hid the cave in which the Resistance made their home. He sheltered his eyes from the sun and squinted west. There were few blotches that could possibly be where the cave mouth was. Doubtless the others knew which it was, but they were all directly west, and so he picked up his pace again. His footsteps were light now, and it was like the exertion wasn't taxing at all. It felt as though his body was being pulled along, like it would have been tiring just to slow down or stop.
"Whoa, kid, slow down,"
Grunt called, but it fell on deaf ears. Shaking their heads and smiling knowingly, they instead just struggled to keep up. When she first saw a tiny speck of blue on the horizon, her breath caught, and it was like her heart skipped a beat. She wanted to shout and yell that it was them, but she had to be sure. At last, when she could better make out the figure, she could see the telltale blue robe, and his golden hair flapping behind him in a ponytail. He was running.
"He's here,"
she shouted. Her heart leapt, and her knees almost failed her.
"Everyone, they're back! They're back!"
There was a clamoring behind her, and a handful of Resistance members dashed out of the cave, one of them fiery. She was fierce and alert.
"How many?"
someone asked.
"Get the damn binoculars,"
someone else called back inside the cave. Eventually, some binoculars were passed forward, and Fiery took them.
"Please, please,"
she whispered. After a moment, she barked out a relieved laugh.
"Ah ha ha! There's 4. They got wind. They're all safe. They did it. They really did it. There she is,"
Chetsney shouted in relief, finally able to make out the forms of many people outside the cave mouth, and her beautiful purple hair blowing in the wind.
"Ah, ha! She's okay."
All pretense was gone now. He ran, faster and faster, not caring now if he left his companions behind. His pack was heavy, and kept making him off balance, so he threw it off, and ran faster. It was like gravity was pulling him on ever faster. His feet felt like he could again move at twice his speed. All the churning worries and doubts and pains were forgotten in that moment. All he knew was that he needed to see her again, to touch her again, and keep her beside him. She was running to him too. And she indeed was moving fast, incredibly fast. Her feet were a blur as she left the throng at the cave mouth and dashed across the grassy plain. The world collapsed down to a single person, and it was like everything else stopped existing. When at last they met, both laughing and crying in joy, he whipped her up in his arms and they spun in circles. Back and forth they babbled incoherently how much they missed the other, and making sure the other was okay, and assurances of their own. But as they stopped spinning and holding each other, there was a moment where they breathlessly looked into each other's eyes. Both saw something wordless there, something they both needed in that moment. In the next, they closed their eyes, held each other close, and kissed. When they came up for air, Midia's face was burning bright red and she stammered,
You kissed me. Ah, oh my God, my first kiss,"
and turned away, hiding her blushing face and squealing with happiness. Chetsney was shocked, having no idea what to do with his hands and gesturing wildly.
I can't believe I did that. I'm sorry, I should have asked first."
She whipped around and tackled him, kissing him again with a huge smile on her lips. When she stopped, she pressed her forehead to his, found his hands and held them in her fingers, and whispered,
"No, please don't be sorry. Not for that. For showing me how you feel."
His hands were shaking in hers. He tried and failed to form several sentences.
And do you? I mean, do you feel about, do you same? Ah, I can't talk. Do.
She interrupted him with another kiss, feeling like her ears were burning from embarrassment.
Yes, dummy. Of course.
Then he held her tight in a hug.
I'm so sorry I left you behind. I'll never, ever do that again. Not for anyone, not for anything. Not even for the world. I've been such a mess without you.
She sniffed, tears welling up at the corners of her eyes.
I tried so hard not to let you see me cry when you left. I spent the whole time worrying if you were safe without me there to protect you. I couldn't sleep. I could barely eat. Are you okay? Really okay? What happened?
She pulled away to look into his eyes and saw such a hurt there. She didn't know what to do.
It's a long story. I'll tell you later,
he said, though he couldn't keep his face from twisting a little. He pulled her into one last hug and held on fiercely.
And it doesn't matter. I'm okay. You're okay. That's all I care about.
She held him too and rubbed his back. Feeling that warmth from him she had no idea she missed until this moment. A huffing form approached.
Here. You dropped this.
Grunt wheezed, slapping a hand on Chesney's shoulder and dropping his pack beside him. They leapt apart in surprise.
Sorry,
he quailed.
Welcome back. Gee, Grunt,
Medea said sheepishly, nervously grabbing the hem of her dress and wringing it. An unfamiliar voice called out from behind them.
Come on, boss. You ruined the moment. Yeah, what a jerk. Where's your sense of romance?
It was then that they both realized that they had an extensive audience to their reunion. Their faces practically turned purple when they realized that pretty much everyone had seen them kiss. Medea hid her face and groaned, while Chesney awkwardly stumbled through a dozen words before just shutting up and putting his pack back on. After everything settled down, and the pair of them endured a bit of light teasing, there was some discussion on what to do next. There was some talk about having a celebration, but the pair of them were both anxious to continue their journey east to the Temple of Zagos. There was no telling how far along Noegrin's construction was, and they'd already lost a day. Thus, the resistance made good on their promise to assist them. They refilled their bottles, gave them plenty of food to last them on the journey, and explained how the resistance worked in independent cells. In the time frame they'd been busy, the rope network south of the base had been repaired and was operational once more. But before they left, Grunt brought them together for a final farewell.
All right, you two,
he began. Wind was at his side, looking a bit thin but otherwise much healthier, and wearing the same camouflage as the rest.
As I've said, there are more resistance cells out there that I'm sure you're going to run into. Your best bet is to seek out their help when you're closer to Zagos' temple. And, so you won't run into the same problems with them as you did with us, I'm giving you this.
Grunt pulled out a sealed envelope and handed it to Chesney.
Don't bother looking inside. It's all coded. The one thing linking us cells together is a secret code only us commanders know. That note roughly explains who you are, what you're doing, and to trust you and help you. Beyond that, I'm afraid we can't be as much service to you as we'd like.
Chesney nodded, and returned a genuine easy smile.
It's fine, Grunt. I'm sure this will prove to be essential. What are you all going to do now? Will you have to relocate?
Medea asked.
No,
Wind said.
I only told them about our plans for the rope network sabotage, but we're going to have to spend some time laying low and establishing a new information network. Well, that's good to hear. Have any advice on where to go next?
Chesney asked, again looking to Grunt. Grunt nodded along and bade them all follow him. He led them out the southern entrance of the cave and started them towards the repaired rope network platform.
Your next stop will be the Karen region. It's not the greatest place in Sasquatch. The town itself has something of a cursed reputation, and the region is one of the coldest regions down south here as well.
He gestured to Gunny, who pulled 2 jackets from his bag. and handed them to both of you.
Here. These are for you two. I noticed you only have cloaks, and that's not going to cut it over there.
Medea looked hers up and down, with a pleased, appraising expression.
Wow, these look really warm. Thank you.
They looked to be mostly waterproof and also had a white fur lining to them. They were a deep, ashy grayish-purple color that made them blend in with the dark soil that Sasquatch seemed to be famous for.
One last thing,
he added.
Because the Karen region is so desolate, it's a great place to stay unnoticed, so there's a lot of resistance activity out there. Sort of an unofficial hub for us. You show that message to the right person, and you'll be golden.
Eventually, they made their way to the base of the rope network platform that even now was slowly turning as empty cars made their slow plodding journey along. Wind came and hugged them both.
Good luck, both of you. Watch out for each other. My fiancé won't say it, but he's really worried about you both, so stay safe, okay?
Grunt grumbled and turned away.
Thanks for worrying about us. We'll be as careful as we can. Good luck to you all. And thanks for everything,
Medea said, graciously. With that, they both climbed up a maintenance ladder that led up to a thin platform that abutted next to where the cars were passing by. As they climbed, Medea asked in a hushed voice,
Wait, fiancé? Is that what this whole thing was about? Yeah. I'll tell you the whole story once we can sit down.
They reached the top and stood side by side on the narrow platform.
So, what? Do we just jump in one really quickly?
Chesney asked, looking down the line for the next car to come by.
That sounds like a recipe for a bad fall,
Medea said thoughtfully, while looking around the area. She noticed some levers tucked away around the side.
Aha! Look here. And up there.
She gestured to a small rail adjacent to the rope, and some other bits of metal.
If we pull this lever, it pulls the rope and forces a car onto the rail. We can get in from there, and after a delay, it pushed the car back onto the rope.
Chesney looked confused.
How did you get all that?
She laughed haughtily.
Because I'm a genius.
She went to pull the lever, and found it to be very difficult. She grunted with effort trying to pull it down before the next car came in.
Now, come here and help me tug this thing.
He laughed.
Well, I'm good for something, at least.
He came beside her and yanked it down hard in a single motion.
Wow, that was easier than I was expecting.
Blushing, Medea retorted.
Ugh, I already loosened it.
He put up his hands in surrender.
I believe you. Humph. Good.
They then waited and watched for another car to come by, and winced as the sound of screeching metal signaled that they'd caught one. While it was on the rail, the door opened automatically, and it very slowly made its way along the platform, inch by inch. Medea first, and then Chesney. They piled into the car and waited for it to merge back on the line. With a very worrying thunk sound, it latched back onto the rope, and they were speeding along. They had just enough time to cram into the back window and wave to Grunt, Wind, and Gunny, who returned their waves. That done, they both let out sighs of relief and sat down opposite each other. And suddenly the car seemed very quiet and awkward, where nobody knew what to say or where to look.
Oh, this is silly,
Medea said exasperatedly after a very long time. She stood up and sat next to Chesney.
There. Just because we, like each other, it doesn't mean we have to be suddenly so awkward.
Chesney laughed a bit.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. I hardly have gotten to talk to you alone for so long. It's, nice.
She smiled and looked at him.
It is nice. Can I? Leaning on you? Sure,
he said, and they spent a few moments getting comfortable. She leaned against him and rested her head on his shoulder.
How long has it been since it's just been you and me? We've had Wild and Fast Joe, and before that we had Slayer and that bastard, Destry. Before that, it was Zeron and Dan. And then Worf. That's right,
he said, reminiscing.
After Fritz, and Tiger, we did have just a brief time where it was only you and me. I still remember when you tricked me on that walk to run and go get that book for me. It was very sweet. Really? I'm glad. At the time, I was still so, I don't know, numb inside. I couldn't really fathom doing something like that for myself, but for you, it seemed like I should. Which reminds me, I don't think I've ever done something like that for you. That makes me a bit sad. What kinds of things do you like? I don't really know, honestly. I like fishing. I like food. I like you.
A thought struck him then.
And cookies.
She perked up.
Really? What kind of cookies?
He laughed.
Any kind, really. Mom couldn't keep any for later when she made someone. They'd all be gone in a day. I'll have to remember that.
Miss Chow really wasn't lying about what she said about men and their stomach, she thought.
Don't worry about things like that, though. I'm fine. Really. Say, did they treat you okay while I was gone?
She chuckled.
Nice topic change. But, yes, they were very understanding of me when I broke down into tears when you left. Let me stand watch at the cave mouth. Gave me a room and kept me company.
He lowered his head.
I'm so sorry I put you through that. Don't be sad. It was my idea. And I tried so hard so you wouldn't see, because I didn't want you to worry.
At last, she sat back up and looked at him.
And what about you? What happened on the trip? I saw the lightning storm on the horizon, and I was beside myself all night. It was. How do I even start? It all started while we were traveling, and I learned that the resistance member we were going to rescue was in fact Grunt's partner.
He went on to explain the entire ordeal. Finding Conchuto, saving Chill from being buried, and finding the town in full celebration mode in preparation for Wynn's public execution. Medea listened patiently until she learned about the festival.
Wait, they were doing what? Like, they were celebrating of their own free will. There weren't soldiers lining them up and making them pretend or anything.
Chudney shook his head. He continued, explaining how Chill had bought rotten vegetables, brought them to the tower, and they found Wynn battered, bloody, and restrained with no way to fight back from anyone. Medea's fists squeezed tighter and tighter as she listened, her face very serious.
And then we escaped, and for whatever reason, I couldn't use warp to return to the cave. I guess I just hadn't spent enough time there to be able to find it again.
Her face lost some of its fury, but it was replaced with wariness.
Chudney, you just skipped over the most important part. What aren't you telling me?
He closed his eyes and rubbed his face.
Is it bad?
She asked, worry in her voice.
Chudney, it's okay. Whatever it is, please tell me.
He tried to start a few times, not quite knowing what to say. Eventually, he got out.
When I saw here there, like that, it was, I don't know. It felt like my only option was to keep my cover, and throw the disgusting rotten thing.
She brought her hand to her mouth, and her expression softened.
Oh no. But then, she looked at me, and it was like she was saying that it was okay. She could take it. It was so brave, and selfless, and I.
He looked at his hands, and it was like he could still feel the blood there between his fingers. Medea sat straight up with bated breath, waiting to hear what he struggled so hard to say.
And I'd just lost it.
He couldn't look at her just then, but he went on to mechanically describe everything he did. He described how he single-handedly killed his way down 6 floors of a heavily fortified tower, systematically killing every single soldier he found there. Described the townspeople's insane reaction to their escape, the ensuing battle, the child, and when he had at last had enough of the violent, his final brutal city-wide attack that finally cleared the way for their escape. When he was finished, he couldn't bring himself to say anything else. He couldn't ask the final question that plagued his mind. Wind had absolved him. Gunny had absolved him. But none of those people were Medea. For a long while, there was no sound other than the gentle whistling of the breeze through the air vents of the car. At last, there was a hiccuping intake of breath beside him, and he finally turned to see her. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, and her mouth was twisted in emotion. Her expression was beyond words. He couldn't tell what all of them were. He watched her struggle to speak, but ultimately fail, and a choked sob came out instead. It all fell out of her then, like a wave of grief.
Chetsney, because you.
After that, it was unintelligible. He had no idea what to think. He couldn't think. Not until she could say what she was trying to say. Not until he knew. Dumbly, he handed her a piece of cloth to wipe her face. She took it, dabbing her eyes and blowing her nose, struggling to take full breaths and speak. When she did, she sounded the most grieved he had ever heard her voice. She looked at him with so much regret in her eyes.
Chetsney, I'm so sorry. If I hadn't made us play along to their stupid little test, you.
She hiccuped again.
I wouldn't have put you in such awful danger.
Her crying turned angry. She cursed, loudly and colorfully, and in grief.
I never should have let you go alone. I should have been there, fighting beside you, not safe in that cave. When you needed me most, I wasn't there.
Of all the things he had been prepared to hear, this wasn't one of them.
Medea, it's okay. I'm fine.
He tried to soothe, his hands hovering at her shoulder, unsure.
No, Chetsney, it's not. You just had to fight off an entire army, by yourself. If anything had happened to you, You don't think I went too far?
She dabbed at her eyes, and looked at him with confusion.
What? No. Of course, Chetsney, you were put in an impossible situation. Don't you realize how much danger I put you in?
She sobbed again.
After the magic school, and the Helm Temple. This time, I made you. Chetsney, I'm so sorry.
She took a second and tried hard to compose herself.
No, Medea, this isn't about you.
She turned to him, and asked,
Are you okay?
He looked at his hands. He felt his heart.
Is it wrong of me to not really feel anything?
She took one of his hands. He flinched, for just a moment, thinking it was still covered in blood and he would get her hand filthy.
Chetsney, nobody can tell you how to feel after something like that.
After a slight hesitation, she asked,
Do you want to talk about it? I don't know. Maybe I should. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Here.
She scooted over, and eased Chesney to his side, and let his head rest on her leg. Idly, she brushed his hair with her fingers. Her fingers hesitated for just a second.
Is this okay? Yes, it's fine. It's, soothing. It's nice.
They spent the rest of the ride in the car talking gently about things. Sometimes they talked about nothing important. Other times, he or she asked a probing question about the other. At some point, Chesney dozed off to the quiet, monotonous rattling of the car as it traveled from relay to relay. Eventually, though she tried to fight it, she too fell asleep, fingers tangled in his hair. They were jolted awake by a metallic thunk. Medea cried out in surprise, and Chesney flopped and flailed and fell off the bench-sill. They both wobbled and tried to regain their footing as the car jostled, entering the mouth of the end of the rope network station. To their surprise, no attendant was there to greet them, and they cautiously left the car, somewhat confused. The arrival area was freezing after they were so used to the warmth that had accumulated in the car. It was deserted as well, with a thin layer of dust on the ground and the railings.
Did we maybe sleep through another stop?
Chesney asked, feeling quite out of place, like he was somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. Medea shivered and drew her cloak about her. She looked back out the large opening, scanning the landscape she could see.
No, I don't think so. Come on, let's head down. Maybe they're just on break or something.
The whole building, while identical to every other rope network loading station, felt like a decayed carcass. The howling, frigid wind that seemed to own the space didn't help matters. It just felt completely abandoned. They made their way down the stairs, feeling eerily unwelcome the whole way. When they reached the bottom floor, they were relieved to actually find someone there. He was a Fiorla man, armed in the most basic sense, who just looked cold and miserable.
Hello, sir. Is this the Karen region?
Medea asked, haltingly. The man almost seemed so fragile he would break if she startled him. He jolted from surprise, then turned to look at them. His expression morphed to relief, then confusion, and then landed on horror.
Oh my, sweet immortals. Kids, where are your parents? What in the world are you doing all the way out here? Going home.
They both stammered, not sure how to respond at first. The attendant shook his head and tried to usher them back, his expression still fixed on horrified.
Look, this is no place for kids. Don't worry about the return fare. You need to head back. But this is Karen, right?
Chesney asked, putting up his hands to ward him away. Exasperatedly, the attendant said,
Yes, it is, which is why you two need to head back right away. I don't understand. Why?
Medea asked.
This is where we need to go.
He looked at them plaintively.
Don't you two know what this place is?
They shook their heads, and for a moment his expression flashed to anger, but then settled on patient worry.
Kids, the only people who come to Karen are just looking for a place to quietly fade away and die.
He stared at them both wide-eyed, hoping they would understand.
This whole region is nothing but a gigantic graveyard.